1, 2, 3.
The following is the full uncut conversation from our episode, Idaho's United Vision Project, Confronting Extremism in America's Heartland. These full uncut conversations are made possible thanks to our member supporters.
To get a sense of where we as a nation have come, consider this. A white Christian evangelical who's been described as the, quote, embodiment of white Christian nationalism is now, today, in second line to the U.S. presidency. Representative Mike Johnson, the new Speaker of the House, is a white Protestant evangelical. And that's a group that represents only about 14% of Americans, a number that's been shrinking over the years, but today has more political power than they ever have. They're largely responsible for the ending of national protections for women seeking to have abortions. They've fired up an anti-queer, anti-trans, and anti-public education drive that is terrifying kids and families and the medical and educational professions everywhere. Their steadfast support of former President Trump could return him to the White House in 2024. It's not just a future whose time may come. In many ways, it's here, minority rule. And it's not just in this country that multiracial, multipolar democracy, majority rule, is in trouble. You can see authoritarian tendencies rising around the world. So what does that mean for our chances of building that democracy, that specifically the multiracial, multicultural democracy that the U.S. claims to aspire to? Today's guests have worked on this question for decades. Adrienne Evans is Executive Director of United Vision for Idaho, the state's only multi-issue progressive coalition. Scot Nakagawa is Director of the 22nd Century Initiative and the author of the Anti-Authoritarian Playbook on Substack. Together, they are convening a gathering in Boise, Idaho this November to consider what small d Democrats can do in this moment. How do people for multiracial democracy define and respond to what is happening right now? And why does what happens in a rural state like Idaho become so important to answering that question? You'll find out. Adrienne Evans, Scot Nakagawa, welcome back to the program. I am so glad to have you both with me.
Yes, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Laura.
Let's start, as I often do, mostly for my own sake, but maybe it'll help you too, by just thinking who is on our mind as we begin this conversation. Adrienne, coming to you, who's on your heart as we start to talk?
Oh gosh, I think just so many people across the country and the world who are struggling with the daily realities of what's playing out before us and the grave consequences. So that's a difficult question because it's hard to isolate in a way that I think maybe once was easier.
Scot, what about you? Who are you thinking about right now?
Well, who I'm thinking about right now is who I'm always thinking about, which are social movement activists. I think it's very clear to us that what's happening in the world is in part the product of the work of social movement activists, and that social movement activists are those best poised to do something, to change some of the dynamics that we're in that are leading us to autocracy, not just here in the United States, but around the world. And so I have them on my mind. I'm trying to figure out what animates them and what moves them and how they're seeing the moment that we're in.
So coming to you, Adrienne, thank you both. When we last spoke, I guess it was probably a couple of years ago, you were about to embark on what sounded like an extraordinary project. Can you tell us about that, what you've been doing in the last couple of years or so?
Absolutely. Thanks, Laura. Yes. So at that time, after the event of COVID, we were trying to figure out how to reach people across a state that's as vast and rural as Idaho. And so we had access to a text-based program. And we reached out with one question after the 2020 election. Our country may be more divided than it's ever been. What do you think is causing this? And from there, now it has been 3 years, and we've had hundreds of thousands of conversations stretching Idaho, North Carolina, Georgia, New York, Oregon, and now West Virginia. And we're learning a lot. We're learning a lot about what are the underlying currents that are making people feel broken, that are causing them to gravitate towards authoritarianism and abandon democracy. And we are learning how to have conversations across difference and be able to really, see each other as human beings and not just as an imposing political party.
And how did this happen? You're starting with one question on a text message to a complete stranger?
So on your phone, you'll get one message. Our country may be more divided than it's ever been. What do you think is causing this? From there, you'll engage in days or weeks at a time with another person for the duration of your call and your time together. And together, you'll explore the differences, the commonalities, the challenges, and figure out what is it that we both are feeling and what maybe caused that, what's underlying that. I think one of the things that we say text message, but this is such a unique program, we're also learning about language, what language works and what doesn't. And it's not coming from a think tank, and it's not coming from a research group. It's coming from real people on the ground talking about the things that they experience and the ways that they contextualize their lives. We have a lot to learn. And I think that's part of the program, right? It's that let's stop, imposing what we think will work and actually let people show us and tell us what is working.
So, Scot, you started by saying that social movements are always on your mind, and you've been involved in them, consulting them, watching them for decades. Looking at what is happening there in Idaho and across the country, but United Vision for Idaho at the heart, what role is it playing? How significant is what they've done, given how many urgent things are out there that you can see?
Well, the Northwest, Idaho and Oregon in particular, have been early adopters of this sort of white nationalist mode of organizing on the part of white supremacists in the United States. The story goes all the way back to the early 80s, when Idaho and Oregon and other Northwest states were targeted by the white supremacist movement of that time in a campaign of strategic realignment and institution building that they launched in that period. The Northwest was considered the whitest part of the country and therefore the most ripe to create a white homeland in. In Idaho, they established the Aryan Nations compound, and in Oregon, they moved organizers, neo-Nazi professional academics and intellectuals and money to the state in order to be able to build a base there for far-right ideas and anti-democratic organizing. So the particular targeting of the Northwest has resulted in us being kind of a bellwether for the country. The future is there in the Northwest. It's it is a harbinger of where we may be soon in many other parts of the country, and therefore really important for us to learn from and intervene in.
So, as you describe it, I feel my heart racing, and I think about the rise of white nationalism and militia organizations, and you've been part of confronting some of them. Typically, what we've seen called for up from progressive forces is legal prosecutions, arrests, detentions, incarceration, the banning of certain organizations. Do we have time for 700 text messages?
We always have time for 700 text messages. The problem is that we often feel we have no time. We react to every emergency and don't make the kinds of investments in the future we need to make. One of the most important things that we can engage in now is foresight planning, to think ahead to what might happen at each turn. We lose our ability to affect elections as majorities, what do we do next? If we turn to the boycott and to the general strike and that doesn't work, what else do we need to do? What kinds of alternative institutions do we need to create? What kinds of formations do we need to create in order for people to remain engaged and fight again for the right to organize and dissent against our government?
And Adrienne, I'd have you answer that question too. I hear the case, but I also imagine that you have at various times felt the urgency. Talk about why this strategy now and what you make of the kind of calling for prosecutions, incarceration strategy that's been so often pursued thus far.
Yes. And to be honest, what I would say is that some of the impetus for this outreach was not just to help bridge the American people and the divide that we face. It was also a wake-up call to the progressive movement, who have taken the most expedient path that I would argue have led us to this moment. Scot and I are often in spaces where we talk about the effects of an unattended democracy, not democracy like the outcome, democracy like a verb, like the process of being able to hold multiple truths, engage in complex conversations, and still hold each other with dignity and respect. We have lost fundamental skills, and we have come to see each other as enemy rather than in a shared, collective journey with the consequences that affect all of us. And I would say the one thing, coming from a rural space, Laura, that's really important, and I want to emphasize for viewers. Yes, none of the things that we are seeing now are surprising to any of us who have been living in these areas, but it should be stunning, because what was once the reality of rural people, of Idahoans, is now the reality of every American in this country. We have lost so many of the levers of power that it takes but one piece of legislation to strip away rights and the right federal judge to make that the reality for every person in this country. What won't work is to treat people like products, like all that they have to do is vote and will only come around and talk to you every 2 or 4 years. People understand when they're being, they're trying to be organized. We need to meet people where they are and deeply invest. This is not about a political party. In fact, I would say the problem is that our movements have become apparatuses of political parties rather than investing in the real people who are living and struggling together to come up with real solutions together to build the social, cultural, and political power that bend the arc of justice. Nothing that has ever been achieved was because a political party had the will to do it. It was achieved because people rose up together in solidarity to make those changes possible.
I would love you to come in on this, Scot. I'm hearing that much of the work that you're describing is about kind of revisiting, for lack of a better word, kind of progressive left strategy and organizing. What was deemed expedient at one time perhaps hasn't proven to be. If you were to elaborate on that, what would you say?
Well, I would say that we have been entirely too transactional with people. So, you asked earlier, do we have time? Well, we need to have the time to get it right, to figure out who is our audience and how are we moving them, because we've made a lot of mistakes there. We've been entirely too transactional. We recognize that Americans across the country often share the same, very similar values, are concerned about very similar issues about housing affordability and jobs and schools and healthcare, for example. But we don't understand is what is actually mobilizing people, what's moving them to the polls and causing them to make the decisions that they're making. That's almost entirely emotional, right? In the end, human beings don't just logically go through lists of possibilities. If I vote for this person, will I get a better deal on my housing? If I vote for that person, will my healthcare improve? They ask which of these two candidates most represents me, and it's talking about the story I'm living, the experiences I'm having, and what is causing me to be worried, afraid, angry, whatever it happens to be that we're feeling in the moment.
So is our analysis not right? I mean, I hear the critique of transactional interactions, but in terms of the bigger picture, I mean, we have a lot of people on this show that describe what they see as happening as being a backlash. That certain people, disproportionately white, male, cisgendered people, are feeling insecure and experiencing a sense of threat at the rise of a multiracial America, demographically speaking, not to mention the LGBTQ rights movement, feminism, immigration rights, civil rights, you name it. Is that analysis wrong, Scot? And then Adrienne.
Well, it's both right and incomplete. So we are facing a big backlash against the gains of the civil rights movement and against the gains of the feminist movement and the LGBTQ movement, the secularization of government, and many other changes that have happened, right? These are very powerful animating forces on the far right. But we also have to recognize that the phenomena we're seeing in the United States is not just happening here within our borders, but around the world. There are nations all over the world that are turning to autocracy. The majority of the world's people now live under autocratic governments, and year after year, that number is increasing. So that can't be explained by backlash to the civil rights movement in the United States, can it? So we need to really start to think about what it is that's causing us at a global level to move in this rightward direction. And I would argue that what we are really facing here at root is a kind of loss of faith in the nation state as a satisfying way of understanding who we are and how we are safe and well in the world. And as people move away from faith in the nation state as the primary kind of container for our identities, they reach to the ones that they were taught are valid to them after that: race, ethnicity, religion, etc. And so we see a rise of ethnic nationalism as people turn to these other kind of identity containers to make meaning in a world in which nation states have lost their magnetism and ability to explain things to people. And so that's the result then of a long history of neoliberal policies that have basically gutted the democratic functions of governments like the United States and others around the world, while insulating markets from democratic decision-making and causing our economies to become very unstable. And so that kind of precarity that people feel then is being interpreted by right-wing manipulators through the filter of fear about the other. And so we're being postured as us and them in this process. And earlier I said, that I'm paying attention to what the activists of the world are thinking, because who is most defining that battle at the grassroots level are activists. Activists on the left and activists on the right do not represent the majority of public opinion out there in the United States or anywhere in the world. But we are, as minority groups, ideological minority groups, the ones that are defining the key conflicts around which our elected leaders are making public policy. And so what Adrienne is doing is so important because it's helping us to understand what is the emotional life of those people who are not the left and not the right. How do we reach them, and how do we do so in a way that doesn't just touch on the material needs that they have, but the cultural anxieties and concerns that they're living in?
Although those material needs are interesting to me. And Adrienne, I'm imagining people in your conversations didn't talk about the magnetism of the nation state, but they may have talked about cutbacks in services. What did you hear?
Yeah, I think what might surprise people is a lot of people are actually, while they may not be articulating it as well as Scott does, right? That is really driving a lot of this, right? And Scott and I have talked often about who's for you and how do you know that? And people on both sides of the political spectrum no longer are believing that government is for them, that they have access or the ability to change the things in their lives. They no longer believe that a better world is possible for them or their children or grandchildren. And when you lose the faith in institutions like that, no wonder when authoritarianism comes in and offers to break that, it sounds pretty good. And so that's what we're really up against, right? Is this belief of, it's the alienation from all forms of government.
And it's presumably not just a feeling. I'm sorry to sound so materialist here, but there have been actual changes to what people can expect from the state. Mm-hmm. Haven't there? Adrienne?
Yes, and it's getting worse and worse. I'll say that, Idaho, not always, but has been a Republican trifecta for many, many years. Now, moderate Republicans no longer have the ability to advance their objectives because those houses have been occupied by people who are leaders in white nationalist movements. And so we're seeing just an ushering in that are breaking down norms and values at a rate that should be alarming and startling. It's like the chaos has now become the normal, right? And once that starts to happen, the faith in that, even participation, right? We've always struggled with voting, numbers, but we're now talking about people who no longer believe that there's a solution possible through the agencies of government, right? And yes, material, needs are absolutely a part of it because the systems have been failing them. Now, they haven't been failing us all in the same ways or to the same degrees. But I think the thing that unites us is to understand that the work that we need to do is literally on the system itself. And so we need to talk about the pillars of democracy and not so much, the latest thing that each group wants to advance, that only serves to polarize us and divide us and fuel, and ignite that kind of rage. There are lots of things that we actually agree on that could help us save the democracy that we have and build on it going forward together. But again, that is deep work and it takes a real investment. And to Scot's point, when we treat people like transactions, we will never arrive at that point.
How do you think the Biden-Harris administration are doing on this score, Scot?
Well, the Biden-Harris administration has done some good things, but my greatest concern about the Biden-Harris administration strategy in this moment is that they're specifically trying to compete for the attentions of white voters, right? And are not investing as much in the consolidation and improvement of our support in minority communities. And so,
But aren't you calling for more support for white voters like those rural folks in Idaho, Scot?
well, we should be competing for their attention, but we should not also forget that a key constituent of any pro-democracy movement in the United States is communities of color, and in particular the African-American community. We need those folks on our side. Those numbers matter and will matter greatly in this coming election. And the participation of people of color in these movements clarifies what democracy really is to us. So, those constituents have not had their stories told so much. They have not been directly reached out to by the administration in a way that is as if to compete for them, for their loyalty with more far-right forces. And what we're seeing is a kind of erosion in the support for liberal candidates and liberal ideas among some of the people in those communities. And that's dangerous. What we don't want to see here is a situation in which the Biden-Harris administration does something along the lines of what the Franklin Delano Roosevelt administration did in order to get us the New Deal, which was to trade Jim Crow for those benefits. We can't trade the kinds of real needs that communities of color have in this time for some sense of bipartisanship and a transactional package of benefits that people might receive that we believe somehow will then win their votes and win the day for democracy. In order to be able to win democracy, we have to behave like democratic people.
So how do we bring about that transformation that you speak of, Adrienne? I'm just trying to think purely practically in those conversations, because you've learned so much. How do you speak about, look, we care about you, we care about your healthcare, your education, your opportunities for jobs, but we also care about affirmative action, and we have to focus on civil rights and voting rights for people of color who haven't had them. How do you do both of those things, sort of square that circle, if you will?
Absolutely. And I would start by saying, and this is really one of the calls to progressive people, to people who, have been part of my camp for many, many years. I too often sit in rooms and have to ask the question, are we saying that we no longer believe that people are capable of transformation? Are we sitting in these rooms and saying that we no longer believe that people can make a bad decision and change their minds? And I would say too often we are, and we're not being real honest about that. I would also say, yes, Laura, for all of the points that you bring up, those have to be addressed, and it's about holding the complexities. But that's not the first place to go. The first place to go is by really listening to people and asking them, how do you square the rights and the things and the values that you've shared with me with these policies? Not to tell them what to think, but to really engage in conversations. And that's where we find that people are moving. And it's not just moving them, right? It's moving us closer to each other to figure out how we can do this. And actually, as Scot aptly says, how are we living our democracy? How are we actually participating in what we say that we so desperately want to hold on to? It must start there. I would say, ask yourselves, when is the last time you changed your mind about something really important? Was it because somebody told you how right they are? Or is it because somebody listened to you to understand how you formed your opinions and beliefs and took the time to engage and to share different perspectives? This is not about agreeing. but it's actually about investing in one another. And we can't expect a government to do that if we can't do that ourselves.
All right, so we three are actually going to invest a little bit of time together any day now in Idaho at a rural democracy summit that you're convening. What are we going to see there? What's going to happen? And what's the point? What's the project, Adrienne?
Yeah, well, I mean, I will say that part of this work, Laura, has been very hard. I feel like I have been trying to sound the alarm on the importance of rural, like Scott, for so many years. And there was a moment after Trump was elected where people started paying attention, and then attention wanes, right? And we think that one election is going to solve the problem. But I will say that I think the proudest work has been lifting up the importance of rural communities and how we can't continue to abandon broad swaths of the country and say, it's us and them, or we don't want to talk to those people, right? And so the fact that we are having this convening with so many incredible social justice leaders, like yourselves, in Boise, Idaho, is huge. People at the end of the day want to be seen. They want to be valued. And the commitment of all of the folks that are coming is a huge statement, right? That we see you and we're not ignoring you anymore. We want to engage in these conversations. We care about you. It must start there. It is also a historic moment because we have never in the history of our state had this many folks come together to make this investment. And I think that speaks volumes.
So what are you going to be listening for, Scott?
Well, I'm going to be listening for people's stories and their strategies. It's often in the most difficult places that people come up with the best ideas. That kind of repression can be the mother of invention. And so I'm looking forward to learning from the people on the ground there about what to do. Because, you asked earlier about the future. I'm going to tell you this really clearly, that the future that what we can learn from Idaho about the future is tremendous, right? Idaho has been basically deindustrialized. Primary resource extractive industries have left Idaho. The state that was once the home to the richest farmers of America is now in a state of terrible disarray in terms of its economy. And government has not stepped in to solve these problems. Instead, far-right actors have stepped into the fray and narrated these problems in ways that have directed the attention of people who are suffering to people like me, to people like us, to those they perceive to be liberals, to those who they perceive to be outside of their identity tribes, who they now view as the enemy. And, so what we know that is in places like that, though, many, many people continue to keep faith and continue to understand that they can be powerful if they act together, and that the future is ours if we remember that government is the prize, not the problem. And so I want to see how they're going about doing that work in Idaho, and expect to come home having learned a few things.
I expect to be reminded just how bad a job most of our media do in covering Idaho or places like it. I mean, if you want to point a finger anywhere, I would say, Adrienne, media might be a good place to point it, because boy, do we give a message in our mainstream media, commercial, corporate, beltway-based media, that most of the country just doesn't matter at all.
Absolutely. And when we talk about the pillars of democracy, media is an essential part of that. Which is why I'm so delighted, Laura, that you're going to be in Boise. I think, one of the things that I'm most excited about is actually to get out into rural Idaho, where we'll be meeting people and talking with folks, where you can have that glimpse of the history and what was once, emerging, and now so much of it's lost, that there are no clinics 100 miles, anywhere in any direction, that young people are leaving because they don't see farming or the family business as being a prosperous future, right? We will see how big agriculture has taken over and dominated. And yet in this thriving mecca of agriculture, there's one grocery store and everything in it is prepackaged food. It's a wasteland, right? We will see how there are very little community establishments and places where people can go to find each other if they wanted to organize. And all of these conditions have created a situation that we must attend to, we must deal with. And so just to be able to bring folks to have conversations, to meet people where they are, and understand that most of these conversations wind up in tears about the very same issues that we all care about. The loss of a parent, the loss of a child for not having healthcare. The difference may be not as vast as people think, right? Not that we don't believe in healthcare, but we don't want the insurance companies to have all the money, right? There are so many things that we assume we have in stark difference to one another, but we assume these things. And that's why I believe our work is so important. We've
talked about the conversations, the text messages, the end product is, if you will, or maybe it's the beginning. But I just want you to remind people that this work is contained, has a container, and describe that just a little, because I think sometimes we underplay in our reporting the role of structure, analysis, networks, and direction. So you don't just have people off there on their own having text messages. You have a project with some heft to it.
Absolutely. So it is a very, very robust training. There's a 62-page searchable narrative guide to help people learn, right? We all have to learn how to do these things, learn how to have nuanced conversations based on anything someone says to you, to do so with respect, but also that doesn't mean sacrificing our ideas or beliefs, right? It means understanding that we have to act with humility and grace, for each other. And that's the way forward. I would also say, yes, texting, but also, just to remind viewers, in a place that is very rural and very vast, with open carry and stand your ground, it is swiftly becoming the only safe way for people to have an initial contact with some folks, right? And it is a practice. So the intent is not to have people doing this outreach. The intent is to have them do it, to learn the skills, develop them, and then work in their own communities, which is where we're very deeply invested and working across the country with Scot and others, right? So how do we make these interventions real?
You've been calling your project of communication the United Vision Project. Where do you take that next? And what are you launching at this Rural Democracy Summit, in fact?
Yeah, so, so much of our work has been, remote because of COVID, and now we're coming back. What we did is we renamed our approach Authentic Relational Conversations, Authentic Relational Organizing, ARC and ARROW. And through this ARC, we come in through a text-based program. We reach out daily. People are learning how to rewire their brains, right? About how to have these conversations. And now we need to move into the point where we can really start pulling at some of those complexities and doing place-based organizing, where we're really doing the investment in rural places around the country who have not had that infrastructure, working with, folks from Scot's team, like this powerful network of people who are really committed to this work. So we've got to invest in those communities. It's not enough to leave them on their own. And this kind of investment is really, it's driven from the grassroots, right? We're trying to get people to invest in it, but this is really about social justice leaders doing the investment now that we know is critical for the future of our democracy.
So I want to ask you, Scot, as somebody who works at the national level, how do we make these interventions real, but also how do we bring them to scale? How do we avoid the kind of, oh, isn't it nice what they're doing in Idaho syndrome? And actually, if this is working in Idaho, bring it to a national level?
Well, I think that we need to document what's happening in Idaho and start to try to figure out how to create a toolkit for people who are working nationally in order for them to be able to duplicate some of the successes. But we need a delivery system, and the delivery system that the 22nd Century Initiative is creating are networks. We are creating networks of organizations through which people can meet one another, build relationships, and learn to share language, share tools, share practices, so that we can develop a strong field of resistance to authoritarianism and the basis for pro-democracy advocacy. So those relationships really matter. In all of this as well, I just want to remind people what the importance of what Adrienne is saying, that as conditions grow more repressive, which they are likely to do at least for some time, the quality of our relationships will become more important to us relative to the quantity of them. And in-person organizing, having conversations, real deep dialogue is the way we build those quality relationships. In the end, we must rely on our neighbors as times get tough, and they will get tough. Whether anti-democratic forces continue to advance their agendas, times will get tough. Climate change will bring us disasters for which we are unprepared, and things will get tougher. And we see patterns in the United States now in terms of people's choices about where they live, where more and more people are moving to only 15 states and to metropolitan areas in those states. That leaves 35 states to older, whiter, more male, more conservative voters who are then positioned to be able to control who gets to be the president and who gets to serve in the Senate, which then also means who gets to serve on the Supreme Court. And so that reality that's looming ahead of us, all of those things are things that we need to go about trying to build the muscle to be able to fight in that context now. And that's what they're doing in Idaho.
And you mentioned, Scott, a pro-democracy playbook. What's that?
Well, the 22nd Century Initiative is now putting together an anti-authoritarian playbook named after my blog, actually. That is a collection of all of the best wisdom gathered by people who have experience in organizing communities at the grassroots level in the United States, and those who have been working in the foreign policy arena, attempting to mitigate violence in failed and failing democracies around the world. And so, we really have taken the position that we are in something like a Cold War that we need to prevent from becoming a hot war. And so we're giving people the tools in order to take the lead in trying to prevent that from happening.
Well, I want to thank both of you. I look forward to seeing you. And before we close, I want to ask you the question that I often ask my guests, which is really your question, Scott. What do we think is the story the future will tell of this moment? Scott, how'd you answer that today?
Well, I hope the future will tell a story about this moment that is about how incredibly adaptable people are, how quickly we can learn, how quickly we can change, and about how much, if we just simply accept that each of us is a powerful change agent that is having an impact on the world already, how much we can accomplish. I'm looking at the timeline between 2016, the election of Donald Trump as president, to where we are now in 2023, and I see an entirely transformed field of pro-democracy resistance to authoritarian rule. It is much stronger, more diverse, much better versed in the kinds of tactics and strategies that we will need, and much more willing to work with people across vast ideological differences. That's an incredibly short time for people to adapt that quickly to a set of circumstances. So I hope that what they'll say is, those folks were awfully smart and they did something really creative and different and new, and they did it so fast that it will inspire them to continue to fighting for more in the future.
Oh, Allah, as they say in Arabic. May it be so. What about you, Adrienne? How will you answer that question?
Well, I will take Scott's lead and try and offer a hopeful version, because I think we are, to be real, there are two scenarios, and one is fatal for democracy, not just here, but around the world. The other, we've been in difficult spots before, and we've had the ability to come together and to dream about a world that we wanted to make real. And we are at a moment, right? No, the Republican Party is shifting, breaking, becoming something different, right? The Democratic Party is shifting, as split maybe as the Republican Party in some respects. We're at a moment where we can interrupt those political binaries that have kept us apart and choose each other and a life that I think most people want, right? We want one where we can all thrive and we feel camaraderie and community with the people that we live with in our families. We have that choice. Now, I hope that we will take up these challenges and this crisis moment to do that, because it is within our grasp if we choose to.
Well, I want to thank you both so much for the work you do and the way you talk about it, and for the invitation to come to Boise. I can't wait to see you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks for taking the time to listen to the full conversation from our episode, Idaho's United Vision Project, Confronting Extremism in America's Heartland. These full uncut conversations are made possible thanks to you, our member supporters. Please consider becoming a monthly supporter for a few dollars a month or by making a one-time donation at lauraflanders.org/donate.